Hi, good afternoon everyone. So today I'll be walking you through on good user stories. And connecting with the tech talk that we had yesterday, I hope you've seen this trend, right, in terms of velocity. So this is one of the main pain points when it comes to release planning, so on and so forth, because we can never get an average velocity if our velocity keeps on fluctuating like this. Could be due to various reasons, but one of the prominent reasons is for bigger user stories. So it's important that we, split the user stories accordingly. So this is like a generic question which we get. Can all user stories be split across? Apparently not. So complex user stories cannot be split. That's a given. But the good news is it's very rare. So moving on to with the compound user stories, that's where we split, a particular user stories into multiple other user stories into smaller chunks. And then when it comes to natural sizing, with all the acceptance criteria, sometimes we just go on with the initial sizing that we did maybe in the release planning, so on and so forth, without doing like further elaboration and without resizing when the acceptance criteria changes. So because of that, we end up with a graph like this. And if you see the trend line, maybe it will be, just this way and then again like this. So it's not consistent, guys. So with agile principles, what's important is to maintain your delivery consistently and deliver in short increments. So let's move into two techniques. With the interest of time, I will not deep dive onto the invest criteria. I presume most of you have an understanding, like a basic understanding on the invest criteria. In case if you not, just Google. So we are an IT company and you guys can do it, just like you do the technology stuff. So the focus of my presentation would be mainly on the split user stories front. And then, let's deep dive. So this technique is called, before we move on to that, in terms of the benefits of having like smaller user stories is about self-imposed urgency. That is where the team themselves feel happy and then they feel a sensation in terms of, accomplishment, which they themselves, would celebrate. So in terms of the retros and so on, you would see this. They have a self, pride in terms of accomplishing, some user stories. So this is the spider approach, which I'm going to take you through quickly. And it's a handy acronym, as you can see. I won't go into S first, but we'll start with P. And P stands for path. So these are different factors. So these are like 5 factors where we can think through in terms of how we are going to split the user story further. So in terms of path, I'm pretty sure that you must have, come across this section, especially with regards to the payment gateway, so on and so forth, where you would have 2 different flows with credit card and with PayPal. So these are like from the flow chart itself, we would be able to identify those. And over here, if you consider a particular step in the flow, which is to confirm the order, you might need to check heaps of validations. And then you guys know the best, right? When we implement, there are a series of validations that we got to do. So in terms of path, we can take these 2 things separately as in form of flows, or to take, troublesome steps further and then split the user stories accordingly. Moving on to I of spider, that stands for interface. That is where we keep the data interfaces in mind, and then when it comes to cross-browser testing, so on and so forth, we can create separate user stories for each of those if required. Or else we can identify the pain points. Now for an example, if we think the Edge browser takes extensive effort, we can create a separate user story for that, saying that as a user of any browser, but troublesome browser, I can do these activities. So similarly, we can keep on splitting user stories as we go on. And this is another example where over here, I'm not sure whether it's very much clear, apologies for that, but over here what you see is the minimum and then the maximum over here. So these are just text boxes over here. Whereas when so that will be released in the first increment, and in the latter increment, we will have all these, fancy stuff, and then with the plus and minus, buttons, so that, the users can easily enter this stuff. So it's important for us to understand at which point we need to split the user story so that we can accomplish things at an early stage of time and give business value swiftly. So that is of paramount importance. And also another analogy is from the data point of view. Now, if we are to import some data, it could be in form of CSV, Excel, and XML. So we can create user stories for the easy ones out, and then handle the troublesome, or like the items which takes heavy effort. Moving on to D, which stands for data. So over here we focus on the type of data, and for each type of data, maybe like it could be integer, chars or varchars, and then there could be limitations and so on. We could split the user stories further depending on the type of the data. And also we could have the sub range, maybe from 0 to 255, or like different data slabs. We can split those user stories accordingly. And R stands for rules. I think most of us are well aware of this. That's all about like restrictions that we have, and then the business logic. So over here, for me to take an example, when we purchase some online tickets for a movie or so on, with regards to a promotion, we might be have a restriction to limit it for 5 tickets for a particular email address. So in that event, we can deliver that at a later part of the release, whereas we can only focus on the online purchase of tickets as the first delivery. And then the increment in the incremental delivery, we will have the restrictions in place. And minimum performance thresholds. So and this is also something which we practice heavily, where we don't try to extrapolate for like another 5 years. We just try to understand what is our current user base, and then try to do the performance testing for that first with our implementation, and then try to take a step ahead in terms of reaching that end goal. And incremental delivery. And also with these things, we can get early feedback from the product owners, be it technical owners or stakeholders in general. So as I mentioned, I did not touch upon the S letter. So S stands for spike. This is mostly used in IT industry, where we don't have much of an understanding. For an example, whether to go for Neo4j database or whether to go for relational database. So that is a decision we need to make. So in terms of that, we might need to do some POCs upfront, so that we would get to know it better. And then we can actually split the user stories accordingly once we have some understanding around that. So as I mentioned before, so spider approach is a very interesting, and also it is it's a handy acronym at the end of the day, right? So we can resonate in our heads as we go on, in terms of, rather than wasting our time in terms of different other techniques, which has about like 100 odd techniques to think through when it comes to splitting user stories. And beware, these are not mutually exclusive. And we don't have to use all 5 of these. Like when I say spider, we don't have to use all 5. But when it comes to the spike, it would be the last resort, because we should not be creating spikes for the ones which we are well aware of. And that should be kept as the last card when we are splitting user stories. Okay, so with the interest of time, I just touch upon a few things. One thing is about the DoD and the acceptance criteria, and this is like a sample story, like a good user story which I have found. You can just go through that. And then I just want to touch base on the job story. And so all this while we were talking about user stories. And then job story is fairly a new concept comparatively, where the focus is on the motivation, whereas in the user stories, the focus is on the persona, like that is a user himself. So it's sort of a powerful thing. You can have a look, or you can just browse through, and then it's by Alan Clement. And then these are like, differences between, job story and user story, like I just quoted some examples. So with that, just to recap, few buzzwords I used. One is the invest criteria, which I mentioned before, which is a technique to split the user stories. Secondly, the spider. It's not a cobweb again, so just remember the spider, but it does not have the E in between. So, and also the job stories. So these are like 3 things which you can, further check on, you can Google and then learn more about those things. And finally, so this site, Mountain Goat Software, is a very renowned site and very insightful. So you can get yourself subscribed if you are interested in agile practices, so on and so forth. You'll be getting like weekly mails from a veteran in terms of in agile industry. He's called Mike Cohn. So please get yourself subscribed to that, and then you will learn a lot. So thank you, guys.